very pleased and honored to have with me on Green TV today for our Meet the Solutionary series, the ultimate solutionary, Bill McKibben. I call him the father of climate change. 350.org is one of his many, many accomplishments. It's a big one. It's still out there. I love it because it says what we need to do is get our greenhouse gas emissions back to 350 parts per million. I love asking people in the streets if they know what the significance of that number is and what the safe level is, and of course, and where we are now in terms of ppms. I love that cross-eyed look I get, and it tells me how much we need Green TV and other media outlets to talk about what's going on, the biggest stories of our time, not getting adequately covered by mainstream media. That's a long introduction. Bill McKibben really needs no introduction to anyone who's been active in the environmental and climate world. Some, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, maybe 19 books under his name, but the beginning was back in 1989. It's seen as the first book on global warming. It's what we called it back then. That was The End of Nature. I read that one, and I love the one that you did, Maybe One, I think it was called, about the environmental benefits of having just one child.
Betsy, what a pleasure to be with you as always. And good to see you in this good new home.
Thank you. And you're looking well. I know you're excited about your most recent campaign. I am too. It's called Third Act, and I'll let you tell our viewers what inspired you to do this. And it's something that I've been focused on for a long time.
Third Act is aimed at people over the age of 60. And there are a lot of us, 70 million or so in the boomers and the silent generation above them, about 10,000 more every day, which actually is more people than are born in this country on a given day. As people get past the age of 60. Now, there's this idea that people become more conservative as they age, and there's a little bit of data for that. But A, we can't afford that to happen. This group's too important. They vote in huge numbers, and most of the economic resources have ended up in our bank accounts. Boomers in the silent generation have about 70% of the financial assets in the country. Millennials have about 5%. So it's going to be very hard to make change unless we're a part of it. And I think that it's possible to imagine that happening. People of this age, people who are over the age of 60 now, their first act, they were around for, either to participate in or at least bear witness to a period of really profound cultural and social and political transformation. People were there at the dawn of the women's movement, at the first Earth Day, the first civil rights movement, and so forth. Now, I think you could probably say that taken as a statistical whole, not obviously with noting exceptions like you, people in their second act may have been somewhat more engaged in consumerism than in citizenship. We may have let up some, but since that water has flowed beneath the bridge, probably time now for us to emerge into our third act with skills, with resources, with time, a most precious resource, with kids and grandkids who were eager not to leave a trashed world behind. So we're working actually on two projects, stabilizing the planet and stabilizing the democracy, that seem to me very interlinked. And this has been one of these years when we've seen probably the worst heat wave in human history, that heat dome over the Pacific Northwest in Canada in June that just spooked scientists to no end because we were breaking records by 7, 8, 9 degrees. And this year also saw the most frightening, really almost inconceivable for people our age, attack on democracy that we've seen. The idea that thugs would be trying to invade the Capitol, succeeded in invading the Capitol of the United States and stopping the counting of votes for the president. I mean,
and the chief thug in the White House, of course.
You would not have, when you and I were growing up, we would not have given the slightest thought to something like that happening.
Oh, come on, they were just tourists, Bill.
So we're determined to see if we can't bring, and so far we've had great luck, lots of people signing up to participate, lots of help from iconic people from this generation, Jane Fonda or Norman Lear or people like that.
They're in their fourth act, I think.
Yeah, well, they're both, considering their age, even not considering their age, spry and able. So there is a lot of talent in this particular demographic pool, and we better draw on some of it, because it really is not okay to take the hardest problems the world's ever faced and just assign them to 17-year-olds as extra homework. We better stand up to, and fast. We'll do it in collaboration with young people. They're the leaders, I think, indisputably in this work, but they need backup.
When I hear adults pointing to the youth climate activist movement as saying it's a good sign, and what gives him, Michael Mann says this frequently, but others do too, gives them hope, is the young people. I say yes, but only if we just don't leave it all to them, that they're shouting at us to do everything we can so they can have a future and get their education and not be so anxious and even suicidal. I mean, and
Absolutely.
you're sure about the women in their young women in their 20s and 30s choosing not to have children, in large part because of what's happening to our climate and environment. That is shocking. That should be stop the press's news.
And it is much easier in a certain way for those of us of a certain age to stand up. I remember organizing the first big nonviolent civil disobedience against the Keystone XL pipeline. When I wrote the letter asking people a decade ago to come to Washington and get arrested, I said, I don't think young people should have to be the cannon fodder here. If you're 19, an arrest record might really, do you no good as you're trying to get your first job or something. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? So we've got some freedom to stand up.
How many times have you been arrested? I think Jane's up to twice, maybe 3 times.
I think I'm 11, maybe.
It's a badge of courage,
I guess. And sometimes it works. I mean, there's a silliness to it, because it's crazy that anybody has to go to jail in order to get people to take seriously the warnings of scientists. You would think it would just be a matter of course, but we don't live in an entirely logical world. We live in a world where vested interest and inertia are powerful forces, and our job is to overcome them. And we see that all around us. We see it in Washington at the moment, where desperately needed climate legislation is held up by Senator Manchin, the largest beneficiary of fossil fuel largesse in Washington. We saw it in Glasgow, where there really wasn't much progress made, because in large part, again, Senator Manchin made sure that Joe Biden arrived with nothing in his pocket.
Empty-handed.
And so,
were you there, by the way? Did you go to COP26?
I was. Mm-hmm.
Would love your impressions compared to previous ones.
I thought that the air went out of the room right in the first day when Biden showed up with really nothing to offer, through no fault of his own. And I thought that was sort of emblematic. It seemed to me, Betsy, that the ability of national governments to push much faster is at this point limited. We see what's going on in the US. I don't think we're going to get stronger climate legislation in a year or two. I think the same thing is true in Russia and Brazil and Turkey and India and China and a lot of other places. That's why, coming back from Glasgow, we're sort of redoubling our commitment to really focus on the other lever that's big enough to matter, the one marked money or finance. And so at Third Act and elsewhere, everybody, we're doubling down on going after banks, asset managers, insurance companies, the people who really keep funding the fossil fuel industry.
The divestment movement has been really quite successful, and you have been in the forefront of that too. I neglected to mention at the top. That is a key lever, absolutely. But just before we leave the topic of COP, in the beginning, there was that, hamstrung president of ours with his hands literally tied behind his back, which was so depressing and discouraging for those of us knowing that this one was make or break, even though, may seem like we said that before, never more so than now. And then at the very end, when India wanted to change the language, which may seem not consequential to outsiders, but the difference between phasing out and phasing down fossil fuels in a country like India, that also kind of made the conference end on a sour note.
Yeah, there were good things. It was wonderful to see the youth there in the lead and marching
out in the streets,
making themselves heard, and wonderful to see the leadership that was coming from the global South. And clearly, there are parts of the kind of business community that at least understand they need now to be making green noises. So that's, that's something. But all in all, yes, I think it was not it was not what we needed after 5 years of the weather that we've been watching.
And here we are more than a month out of Glasgow, and Manchin is still holding things up, and it looks like we're not going to get any action for Christmas next week. How upsetting is that to you, just on a personal level? I can only imagine. I don't have to imagine because I feel the same, but it's so outrageous that in 2022 almost, some of them are getting away with this, no less a Democrat in name only, perhaps.
Yeah, no, it's beginning to turn into a real charade. And, like Lucy with the football, he keeps, they think they've got things lined up, and then he, pulls the ball away at the last minute, and Biden falls flat on his rear end. And it is painful to watch. I guess if one was looking for good news, it's that there are a lot of interesting things happening at state and local levels. We have some remarkable new leaders. The new mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, whose first act was to sign the ordinance divesting the city from fossil fuel. We're seeing New York City institute this week a ban on new gas hookups for new construction. New construction is going to have to be all electric for heating and cooking.
That's huge.
These are important steps. Our problem, as you know better than anyone, is that this is a time test. And so, nature is not going to grade us on a curve. We're either going to meet the limits that she sets or not. And at the moment, we're not. And that's a little dispiriting.
And look at the weather that's already here, just 2021 alone. I don't know if you know, but I moved from the Bay Area, where I was raised and schooled at Cal, and lived in Marin County, where we raised our daughter, moved to the outskirts of Austin, Texas in 2018, in part to
you and everybody else.
Yeah, before Elon Musk. My husband's a trendsetter. I can't take credit. I wasn't crazy about moving to a red state, but he's a small business owner, and the taxes became kind of prohibitive. And so I have neighbors who bought our solar panels, half of whom voted for Trump, because we're in the outskirts out in hill country. It's equally red and blue, I would say. And we're trying to do our part to green the neighborhood. Out of 200 homes where the sun beats down and it's triple digits in the summer, we were the first home owners to put solar panels up, and had to fight in our homeowners association. Now a couple of others have done so. But we were there for Snowmageddon in February, and that was harrowing, absolutely harrowing. And that was just one of the highlights of the extreme weather we've seen. As we are speaking, of course, the typhoon in the Philippines, the Midwest has just seen the biggest tornado, 200 miles long, devastating, how many states, especially Kentucky. And I'm sure you feel like I do when you see the pictures, especially of these children and babies who were literally thrown out of the arms of their parents, out of their homes, into fields where they perished. It almost just stops me in my tracks. And it's only going to get worse. And you wonder how many of those poor people even understand climate change, or perhaps their politics. Maybe they voted for Trump, who rolled back all this environmental progress. And how frustrated do you get? And how do you deal with that?
When I get frustrated, I just try to organize some more. That's why we do this, third act work.
And even with predictions of extreme weather, obviously it's happening much more fast and ferociously and frequently than the climate scientists had predicted. How frightening is that, as we start another year? Like, what's to come? My goodness.
I think it's very frightening because big physical systems are starting to break. The sense that the jet stream and the Gulf Stream no longer reliably operate in the ways that we're used to is growing on scientists. Last year was powerful in that regard, and that's scary. All the predictions of what's going to happen are bad enough on their face, but if it turns out that we've been missing some of the, and it would make sense that we were, because of course we've never run this experiment before. There's never been any real reason to call into question, at what point the Gulf Stream or the jet stream would begin to go awry, but they clearly have begun to go awry, and we don't know how robust they are. And so I find those things quite scary.
And especially in this case, again, the officials, the governor, mayor of Mayfield, they're talking about, God's will and natural disasters. It's as if there's still a disconnect as to what's behind this. And then they talk about building back, like the most they can offer is we're going to help them rebuild. Well, if it's not going to be for a climate change future, this is only bound to happen again. It's somewhat random in terms of where these events hit. A little bit of change in the weather, the winds can push it off Louisiana or right onto St. Charles, Port Charles,
Lake Charles,
yeah, over and over again. But what's causing it is not random or mysterious at all.
No, it's very true. We're just loading the odds, loading the dice day after day, and the part that makes it excruciating is that we have at hand available solutions. The engineers have done such a good job in lowering the price of solar power and wind power that it's really the cheapest electricity on the planet. And there's very little technical or financial obstacle really to doing what needs doing. There's just the obstacle that comes when there's a very large and powerful industry determined to maintain its business model a few more decades. And its business model is just, we dig stuff up and set it on fire. And as long as they're able to maintain that, we're not going to make progress at the pace that we need. Hence things like these campaigns around banking and divestment and so on.
We would have an epic challenge, humanity would, if it wasn't for the dark forces that continue to suppress progress, undermine it. And that continues. And isn't that so outrageous? And often under the guise of, being for climate action, and even more insidious, that this is still going on. And the other issue that I'm primarily focused on is, eco-illiteracy. We really do have a population that is not understanding well the science of all this. It is complex. We're teaching, I think, environmental studies. I know you're teaching it at Middlebury College. I'm sure you have inspired many a student to go into some field of activism or climate profession. And yet we're in Florida right now. There's no recycling to be had. I wonder, as we're in this bubble where we talk about these issues, interviewing the solutionaries, then there's a Walmart next door and I'm going to go check out that scene. But there's a sense that the masses still aren't understanding this. It's Christmas and consumption and convenience and all those factors that have driven us to this point. How do we reach all of them?
Well, I think the good news is that the polling data indicates that people now do really understand climate change in a way they didn't even 3 or 4 years ago. And partly that's because we've built big movements, and partly it's because Mother Nature is a good educator. And between those things, we're up about 70% of Americans who understand this to be a problem and take it seriously.
Perhaps they don't know what to do.
Yes, and that's why we keep building these outlets for organizing, to take that energy and put it together in a way that it hopefully can be effective. And sometimes it is, the divestment stuff being a very good example. But again, this is a time test, so we have to move very fast. And I'm afraid I have to move very fast too. I have another interview to get to, but Betsy, this is great fun to get to see you and to say congratulations on this new effort.
Thank you so much. And just parting words, if you could just tell us, what would you like people to do to get involved with Third Act, regardless of their age? Perhaps they can get their
So
parents,
easy,
grandparents involved.
so easy. Tell your parents, your grandparents, if you're over 60 yourself, all you have to do is go to thirdact.org, and it couldn't be easier.
And let's hope this is another successful act of yours. At least you're leading this one. I love it. My favorite one yet. I'm part of that, and we need to do our part, and it's the least we could do. Thanks so much, Bill
Take
McKibben.
care.
What an honor to have you. And that does it for this edition of Green TV. See you next time.